To the younger viewers who are watching, you might think that our railroads of today are dominated by diesel trains. Well, you might want to think again. Our locomotives of today are actually revolutionary. It was technically steam that once dominated the rails from its very beginnings, dating back to the development of the first steam engine in the near end of the 18th century. They soon were ceased around the mid-20th century as a new era in railroading began. Three main locomotive works were around back then, but now they're out of business. The first one on the agenda is the American Locomotive Company, or Alco for short, which was located in Schenectady, New York. In 1848, Alco was actually called the Schenectady Locomotive Company until they merged with the Brooks Locomotive Works and the Richard Locomotive Works later on in 1901. Five other smaller companies merged 4 years later in 1905. Alco has placed second with the Baldwin Locomotive Works, which was the biggest locomotive builder of its time. We'll get back to that later on. In 1906, Alco entered the automotive industry, manufacturing cars, but ceased its automotive business in 1913, 7 years later after it began. But during that 7 year period, the population in Schenectady has more than doubled from 31,000 to almost 73,000 in 1910. I remembered a population boom in Los Angeles, California, but that's another story. Alco started investing in diesel-electric technology later on down the line. Partnering with General Electric and Ingersoll Rand, Alco built their first diesel locomotive in either 1924 or 1925. This box cab switcher is an SD-3 diesel locomotive, the first diesel-electric to be built. This locomotive can be seen at the Baltimore and Ohio Railway Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, if you plan on visiting the place. While one division of the company made freight locos, another division of the company made diesel passenger engines. These were specifically made for the New York Central. From its earlier box cabs they made in the 1920s, they eventually grew to bigger, more streamlined diesels in the 1940s. Alco has captured 40% of the diesel train market as a result, knocking the Baldwin Locomotive Works out of first. They grew from box cabs to streamlined cab units, road switchers, and yard switchers. During the 1940s, World War II has begun, and Alco soon started making army tanks, tank destroyers, and ammunition. They still made locomotives during its time, and employment with Alco increased threefold. But unfortunately, they were about to hit hard times later on. Alco soon became unpopular and wasn't anywhere near selling rates for locomotives. As a result, they resorted to manufacturing non-railroad products, such as nuclear plant components and oil drilling equipment. In 1969, the American Locomotive Company filed for bankruptcy and ended its operations, with the exception of one subsidiary that manufactured diesel engines, until they officially closed its doors for good in 1979, 10 years later after they filed for bankruptcy. It's now been 44 years since they've closed their doors, and what's left is a marker in Schenectady County as a reminder where Alco once stood. We take another look back to the locomotive works from a bygone era. This next one will play a role in not only locomotive making, but machinery making and merging with one of the main locomotive works. We'll also be looking into the last of the three main locomotive works later on in the future. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Lima Locomotive Works, located in Lima, Ohio, hence the name. When the Lima Locomotive Works was founded in 1869, it primarily manufactured farm and sawmill equipment. Later on, it produced steam locomotives, which included the Shay locomotive, a train that was a geared loco that was used by logging companies to haul tree logs. Two of these Shay locos can be seen in action at the Cass Scenic Railroad in West Virginia. They also manufactured the Pierre Marquette 1225, a 284 Berkshire steam locomotive that was built in 1941. 39 of these Berkshires were built, in which two of them worked for the Pierre Marquette. The two I knew were the 1223 and the 1225, but it was hard to know if there were any others. In 1947, the Lima Locomotive Works merged with the General Machinery Corporation, located in Hamilton, Ohio, and the Lima Hamilton was soon named. From what I can research, they made cranes, particularly massive ones that weighed in at 220 tons. Lima Hamilton merged with the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1950 to create the Baldwin Lima Hamilton Corporation. But just the same, the Baldwin Lima Hamilton closed its doors in 1972. 26 years later, the works were demolished. 129 years later, when the Lima Locomotive Works first began, is now a lonely plot of land next to a railway yard, including this plaque of where the Lima Locomotive Works once stood, which was erected in 2002. We've went over the American Locomotive Company and the Lima Locomotive Works, but have yet to go over the last loco works on the list, and that's the Baldwin Locomotive Works. We'll be covering that in this video. As stated earlier, Alco was second in locomotive production to the Baldwin Locomotive Works that was once number one on the locomotive production list during its time. The Baldwin Locomotive Works was founded in 1831 by Matthias Baldwin, the man who made a name for himself for designing and manufacturing locomotives. The original location of the Baldwin Locomotive Works was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was a small 200-acre spread of land on Broad Street. In 1906, the Baldwin Locomotive Works moved from Philadelphia to a 600-acre piece of land in Eddystone, roughly 20 miles away, give or take a few extra miles depending on where they once were. There were a few debates on the name of the company during the time they moved and the day it was founded, but eventually, the Baldwin Locomotive Works was declared the official name of the company. Like Alco, the Baldwin Locomotive Works built weapons, shell casings, and other ammunition for World War I. But things made an unexpected turn for the worse. The Baldwin Locomotive Works fell to the Great Depression and later filed for bankruptcy. Sometime later into the late 1940s, steam locomotive sales had dropped from 30% to 2%, a 28% decrease. Steam locomotives were soon being phased out to make way for the diesel-electric locomotives, as steam was becoming too expensive to maintain. The Baldwin Locomotive Works merged with the Lima Hamilton in 1950 and became the Baldwin Lima Hamilton Corporation. But 6 years later, operations were suspended in 1956. During the 125 years, 70,500 locomotives were built for various rail companies, which included the Pennsylvania Railroad, Southern Pacific, Baltimore and Ohio, and the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. The Baldwin Lima Hamilton Corporation closed its doors for good in 1972, 16 years later when it suspended its operations. 51 years later, the Baldwin Lima Hamilton Corporation location is no more, and a new business sits on its grounds today. Well, we finally got through them all, and what a relief.
Like I promised, the video has been made into a triple feature-length special. Now, I've got some urgent matters I need to attend to in life at the moment, so I may or may not be posting as frequent as I once had. But hopefully everything will be sorted out soon. Also, at this time, rail fanning is currently out for the season, for me at least, in my own opinion. Plus, if you haven't seen my Michigan Steam special, I left a link in the description below. So be sure to check it out, and as always, be sure to leave a like and comment in the comment section and stay tuned, because over the next month, we'll be seeing a railfan location everyone knows about. Hope you all have a great day and a new year as we ring in 2024.